listen up, please. Thank you. So plan for today is to go over the actual final deliverables for the create task with regards to the assignment for everybody for the fourth quarter. When we get past the actual due date for everything, which is next Wednesday and Thursday, which is so much time to do this, it's not necessary nearly at all. It's certainly one of those, if you give someone an hour to do something, it'll take an hour. If you give them a week, it'll take a week, whatever that principle is called. Peter principle? I don't know. Either way, there are 3 requirements, 3 deliverables, 3 different things besides the actual app in AppLab. The first 2 are maybe a combined 10 minutes of work. They are just basic technical challenges, not even a challenge. So one of the 3 things is a PDF of all of your program code. The way you're going to do that is you're going to go to CodePrint, which is a CodePrint for program PDF. It is a why do we have a capital R there? That finger. There we go. It is a web app, I guess you would call it. And all you need to do to get a nice, pretty PDF of your program code is to go to your program code, which is one of these, and copy the text in Control A, Control C. And when you get here, you need to delete the existing text and do Control V. And this is your program code. We no longer need to do highlight. Back when, a few years ago when we were still doing this, there were requirements where you had to highlight with a rectangle the program code, the function definition you're talking about, whatever. None of that is required, just this PDF. And you click on print and save as a PDF, and that's it. Okay. Give me a second. I'm not sure. I don't want to dox anybody. Give me a second. Why is this like this? We go print and it is, my computer is struggling. Why? Oh no. And there we go. Okay, so it's just that easy. You make your put your code, text of your code there, and click print and save as a PDF. Super important. Don't put your name anywhere in this. Okay, and that goes for all of your submission things. Not the yeah, I guess so. Your name will be identified by where you submit it on Canvas. And this is important because that is a College Board requirement when you submit your digital portfolio to them. Again, different than the fourth quarter assignment. They don't want any identifiable information for the reader to see, for them by chance to know who you are, which I think makes sense. But that's all you need to do. What I just did, copy the code and hit print, and that's it. What's up? Don't need a title. No title, no other text. That's fine. That's it. That's it for the code print, the PDF for the that one deliverable. And I thought I changed this. Oh, maybe it was the other one. What's up? I would say make it again without a title. You can have a title that's a name of the app. That's fine, but nothing that is for you, that is identifiable as you. The second deliverable is the screen capture of your app working. Now, if your app has bugs, do not highlight those bugs. It is okay if your screen recording of your app working only accesses parts of the code that work, parts of the app that work. That's fine. Okay. While there are going to be slight differences in the requirements for the actual College Board situation, we'll get to those when we're done with this, when we're done with the class time for this. The reader is not going to see your actual code. They're not going to be able to look in your app lab and the way I grade things. They are just going to get the video of your app working, the program code, and some written portions about your program. So like I said, if you have a bug or something, do not highlight it. The screen recording itself, Chromebooks have many a feature. There are plenty of extensions like Screencastify works fine. And depending on what device you're on, you'd use different applications. But the key is it's just less than 30 seconds. And we'll get to the requirements when we get there. Less than 30 seconds. And there's also like a file size requirement, which I don't think is difficult to meet, like 30 megabytes or something, which we'll solve if yours is over that. But it's just your app, your inputs and your outputs, and your doing whatever it's supposed to do. Now, I would say your best bet is to run your screen capture. Well, first of all, make sure your screen capture isn't a full screen capture, because then your name would be on the screen, which is again not the requirement. I recommend doing like sharing, copy link to project, and open in a new window, and then you get the clean single screen version. And this you could do, well, give it a second to pop up. This you could do as a full screen if you were stuck with it, but because there's no identifiable information, or there's no information that would identify you when it's in this format, but I still would probably do a cropped screen just to make sure you're under the file size, although I don't think, like I said, I don't think that's an issue. Okay, so the key is the video shows the inputs and outputs. Okay, and that is 2/3, well, 2 out of 3 of the deliverables, besides the app itself. Okay, there's the program code PDF, the screen capture, and the written response. So the written response is actually where most of the points are going to come from. Let's take a look at it. Go ahead and open it up and make a copy. And if you already made a copy, that's fine. There's a couple places that I added a thing since you've made a copy, if you made one before today. And I've highlighted those so that, hold on, let's highlight this one. They are just basic explanations of that. As I read it, I realize where most of you are and would benefit from those explanations. So the written response is broken up into three parts or 4 parts. 4 parts, each with a couple of, between 3 and 5 sub parts. And each of them has a sort of length. I don't want to say length requirement. I get way too many questions about what if it's 149 words? No, approximately. This is to give you a guideline, I don't want to say hint, but an insight into the expected amount of text. So it's not a 1-word answer. It's not, a sentence for each is probably not enough either, depending on how many commas and semicolons you use. It needs to be fleshed out about that many words, and that word total is for all parts of question 1, which is everything between the number 1 and the number 2. So let's look at these questions. These first questions are, my advice is always don't overthink it, just use your words. I know people get bogged down in the details of the questions and sort of get overwhelmed. It's not, if you're getting overwhelmed, it's not as difficult as you think it is. Okay, first one. Describe the overall purpose of the program. What is the point? Not how does it work, or how does it do what it's supposed to do? Why does the app exist? Is it for entertainment? Is it productivity? Is it, why? Why does it exist other than the fact that it was an assignment? What is its purpose? 2, what is the functionality? What does the user actually do? What is the input output? Describe what you do with it, which is a slight difference, but when we get to the rubric, you'll see the difference. And last one, describe the input and output of the program demonstrating the video. This is literally what the user is inputting. Are they inputting the text that's supposed to be something? And are they getting back a picture of something, or what information are they getting back? If it's a game, what it's going to be, some sort of clicking, or I don't know, but it depends, obviously depends on your app. And you can see why you need to finish your app first. It would be difficult to do this. So that's part 1. Part 2, capture and paste 2 program segments you develop during the administration of this task that contain a list or other collection type, which none of you did because we didn't do any objects, or I don't know what other data type we used, being used to manage complexity. Okay, we've used the term manage complexity intermittently, occasionally. In this case, well, in general, it means to simplify things. Obviously, you know what those words mean. Here, with a list, or with this specific part 2, why do you need a list to store information as opposed to an entire page of global variables? Why is a list better? Some general ideas without giving you the actual text to write. They can change sizes. You can append as you run and remove as you run. You can loop through, otherwise known as traversing the list. Traversing a list is when you do a loop, list.length number of times. When you do something to every item in a list, like run a conditional on it, which is what most of you have done. Okay, so first block is a code segment. First program code segment show how the data have, and data is plural. I feel like Google should know that. And is being stored in the list, meaning where are your lists getting the information, either the get column or an append item. Now, it is important to know that you are only talking about a single list, a single array. You may have a bunch, you may have them, you may have 6 filter lists, and they are all used identically. They all get a get column at the top. They all get wiped at the beginning of the filter function. They all get append if the conditional is true. Pick one. You are talking about one list, and you're going to write the name of the list here, just the name. The code segments need to be about that list. Now, the code segments, you can legally copy text, copy the code in text for your code segments, but I would say might be better to do in block mode. Your call on that. But if this was the one that I was using, I would say the list, where is it? The list gets the information. Is that the first question? In that particular app, program saying how the data is being stored in the list, meaning somewhere append item. Like, let's say I current check times, received time. I forget how this app even works, but let's say current check times is the list that I'm talking about. I would just do some sort of screen capture, but not full screen of the area that meets those requirements, and just put it in there. That's it. The second part is where the same list is being used, like where you loop through it. Okay, so if this is the cur check times is the list that I'm using as my example of storing data, I can see where that list is actually being used, which is my next portion. This portion is the part that's being used. Maybe make a neater snip than that. And you put that code segment there. I've added hints, not even hints, instructions for affordances that say what, in case you're having trouble interpreting, that is where those two code segments go. It is unlikely that they are going to be the same code segment or the same snip. Now, you might need to use one of those later on. There might be a duplicate of one of those in one of the later questions, but for now, those two, I can't imagine them being the same. So we've got a code segment of where your example list is getting information or getting its data, either get column or append item, and the code segment where you are using that list, for instance, a dot length traversal type of thing. Then we have just the name of the list. That's it. And what is actually being stored in that list? Text. Okay. And here's the part about managing complexity. Explains how the selected list manages complexity in your program code by explaining why your program could not be written or how it would be written differently if you didn't use that list. Okay, explain the necessity of the list. Part three. Part three is about student, as I say, program code segments you develop this task, student developed procedure. Student developed procedure means the function, specifically in most cases for this, the function definition that meets the requirements of your shining example of a function. What do the requirements need for your shining example of a function? You need, I'm sure I have one here, a function that receives a parameter. And this is, I actually can't remember if this app has one. It probably does. This actually might not be a great example. It needs to receive a parameter, needs to have a loop, like a for loop, and needs to have a conditional in it. One of your functions needs to have those things. And it cannot be an event handler. Obviously, you will need event handlers, but if you had all of your stuff, I don't want to break this app. If you had all of your stuff in an event handler, for instance, if you had your example, shining example function that looked like this instead of in its own function, that's not good enough. they don't count event handlers as student developed. All right, it's not that hard to change that by putting everything that's in the event handler inside its function, and then the event handler just gets the function call. It's the exact same and solves the problem. But it does need to have a parameter, a loop, which this example doesn't, and a conditional. Now let's look at what we do with that. Okay, needs to contain a student-developed procedure that implements an algorithm using the program and call to that procedure the function definition and call. Okay, approximately 200 words. I think my battery of my mouse is dying. Approximately 200 words for all parts of question 3 combined, not counting program code. Okay, first program code segment must be student-developed procedure that defines the procedure's name and return type if you have a return type. Contains the use of one or more parameters that have an effect on the functionality of the procedure. That just means you can't go to a function definition and put in like input and have that count because it's not used here. So we've talked about this as we are making it, specifically the first day and several times since. That parameter needs to be used in the function itself. And this phrase implements an algorithm that includes sequencing, selection, and iteration. Sequencing just means things are done in order. I can't imagine, I don't know why they put that in there. I don't know how you could not have it. Selection just means a conditional, and iteration means a loop. So you need a function definition. This is where the function definition goes, and this is where the function call goes. In the example here, my function definition that doesn't actually meet the requirements is this one, not this one, is, where's my thing? No. Okay, I think my mouse is dying. Ugh. Okay, so that is my function definition that meets the requirements. And then the other requirement is where the segment is called, which make sure it's the same function that we're talking about. And that one is, this is where that function is called. And you would put, just like before, those two code segments in the written response. Okay, that's where those go. And then talk about them briefly. Okay, first one describes in general terms what the identified procedure does and how it contributes to the overall functionality of the program. What does the function do? How does it fit into the big picture of your app? Okay, next part explains in detailed steps how the algorithm implemented, the algorithm you're talking about, is in the identify, how does it work? Your explanation must be detailed enough for someone else to recreate it. For a regular filter function, it would be all of the filter lists are reassigned an empty list in order to wipe them. Then a loop through, then we traverse the entire whatever list, and at each index run the conditional that checks for blah, and if that happens, blah, blah, blah. Okay, how does that function that you're talking about work? And part 4, this is where you're describing, it's also about the function that you are using, but describing how it would work in 2 hypothetical uses. As in, the first hypothetical use, not even theoretical, if the app was actually being used and the user had some input, a particular input, that's the first one. And the second one would be if they have another particular input. And based on hypothetical first call and hypothetical second call, what describes what conditions are being tested. What would it be testing? Comparing what in your conditional, how would your conditional literally run based on this input, hypothetical running of the program, and based on this input, what would the function actually be testing? And yeah, there we go. A new mouse. Where are we? Are you kidding me? Is this still not? Oh, let's just go back. Steal batteries. Sorry, folks. This doesn't work. I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, I know what to do. Okay. So hypothetical second call. What is the condition being tested in that? And then what is the result? What would be the output of those two hypothetical scenarios when they're called? What is the function outputting type of thing? Okay, question. Yeah, it's if the user put in this as their choice, what would the conditional actually be testing? And if the user put in this as their input, what would the conditional actually be testing? It's the same. Yes, exactly. Different pathways. Thank you. Different pathways if you have the if-else situation. If you just have a basic conditional, you could run it as a, what scenario makes it false, that sort of thing. Okay, that is the written response document. Let's take a look at the rubric for how it's going to be graded, which here it says scoring guidelines rubric. Okay, so this is the rubric from it's actually last year also, it says 22. The rubric is similar. It's a different submission thing. We'll get to it. You'll see. It's only minor adjustments when we actually finish this project compared to what you'll need to submit for College Board. But for this class, for the project that is combined going to be the majority of the fourth quarter grade, we're going to be using this scoring rubric. And the scoring rubric has 6 rows. Okay, the AP testers, or readers, I should say, can only give you 0 or 1 point for each row. There is no partial credit from the standpoint of the AP reader. I, on the other hand, am allowed to give you partial credit because it's my choice. And that is to your benefit. Also note that you might get a perfect score on, or a very good score for the assignment you submit to me, but I'll be grading it much less strictly than the AP testers, or readers, I should say, will be grading it. Specifically, they can't give partial credit. It is just out of 6 points, or this version of the project was out of 6 points. And we will go through them. Now, each one of these rows for us is going to be an assignment. Now, it sounds like a lot, but what you're actually doing is this document. It's just how the grades for this project will go in the grade book. Each one of these rows is going to be an assignment, like out of 10 points, but most of them are freebies based on doing something else. If you've done this part, you get the next one for free, and we'll go through this and we'll see how it works. Row 1. This includes the video Okay, the video needs to show input, the app working, and some output. Okay, and the row 1 refers to part 1 of the written response. Does that first part of the written response describe the purpose? Does it describe the functionality that's actually happening in the video? And does it describe the input and output that's actually provided or demonstrated in the video? Okay, row 1 refers to part 1 of the written response. That is what's going to be graded in order to grade this row 1 assignment. It doesn't line up perfectly as far as 6 rows and 6 parts, because there's 6 rows and 4 parts for this, but again, we'll see as we go. Okay, row 1, consider only the video and written response. These 3A, 3B are old formatting. It's just part 1. Consider only the video and the written response that are that first part with the three different things. For this, okay, do not award a point if the video doesn't show the demonstration of the video working, and the described purpose is actually the functionality of the program. The purpose must address the problem being solved, meaning why does the app exist, and the function is the behavior of the program during the execution. Okay, and the input and output is literally what the user is doing in the video. That is row 1. That's it. Row 2, data abstraction. Your written response needs to include 2 program segments that show how the data is being stored, how the data stored in a list, how the data is being used in the list. These are just the first 2 parts of part 2. The grading is based on, is this a code segment that shows where the data is being stored, and is this a code segment that shows where the data is being used? It also needs to identify the name of the variable representing the list, which is this. Just write the name of the list that you're talking about. If your code segment has 5 lists, just name one of them. You are only talking about one of them. The rest of row 2 describes what data is being contained in the list, meaning part 2, 4, part 2 IV is the requirement that row 2 is being based on. So row 2 is being based on the part 2. Okay, part 2 of the written response. Consider only written response from that part. Okay, requirements for the program code segment. The written response must include 2 clearly distinguishable program code segments, but these segments may be disjointed code segments or 2 parts of a contiguous code segment. It's one chunk of code, one thing, but I don't know, you could see the explanation. And if the written response includes more than 2 code segments, use only the first 2 code segments to determine whether the point is earned. Just put 1, problem solved. Okay, do not award a point if any one of the following is true. The list is a 1-element list, and the use of the list does not assist in fulfilling the program purpose. Some of you have situations that will cause an issue with this portion of the situation. If you're not taking the AP test and you're willing to lose half a situation here, I would probably call this 50%. If the list you're talking about is a list that will only ever contain one thing, it doesn't need to be a list. If you're taking the AP test and you want to get all the points, you might need to readjust your app so that it needs an actual list. Okay, that is row 2. You need a list. What is your list? How is it used? Why does it need to be a list? Okay, row 2. Row 3 is also about the list portion. It includes a program code segment that shows a list being used to manage complexity, meaning the list actually needs to help the program and needs to be used as a list. And sort of realizing that this requirement is essentially this requirement, sort of. But you'll see a lot of these things, there's overlap. And that's what I was talking about, freebies from doing one thing and get the other thing. All right, that section 2 about lists also needs to explain how the named selected list, meaning the one you're talking about, manage complexity in the program code by explaining why the program code could not be written or how it would be written differently without using the list. Why does the list need to exist? Okay, do not award a point if any one of the following are true. The code segment contains a list that are not separately included in the written response. The written response does not name the selected lists. The use of the list is irrelevant or not used in the program. The explanation does not apply to the list. The explanation of how the list manages complexity doesn't make sense. The solution without the list is implausible, inaccurate, meaning when you say how it would work without the list, if it's gobbledygook, it's not going to count. And the use of the list does not result in the program that is easier to develop, meaning that's more managed complexity. And the use of the list does not result in the program that is much easier. Wait, is that the same thing? I misread it. Easier to develop, meaning alternatives for easier to maintain, meaning the future changes. These are all asking the same thing. Why is it a list? Why does this portion of your code need to be a list? How does it make it easier or even possible as opposed to not having the list? Okay, row 4, 5, and 6, the remaining 3 are all about the part 3 and part 4, the things to do with your shining example of a function. Okay, row 4, 2 program code segments, one showing the student developed procedure with at least a parameter that has an effect, and a code segment showing where it's called. That's just these 2 code segments, 3.i and 3.ii. Okay, and describes what the identified procedure does and how it contributes to the overall functionality. Again, this first text area. That's what row 4 is about. Okay, requirements, the procedure must be student developed. If multiple procedures are included and none are specifically called out in the written response, use the first procedure. That's just, these are the reader's explanations, obviously, or instructions. And the parameters used in the procedure must be explicit. Explicit parameters are defined in the header of the procedure, meaning we're not talking about global variables. The procedure from your, the parameter from your procedure needs to be used. We talked about that. And the code segment do not award a point if the code segment consisting of the procedure is not included in the, so you have to have it in the paper or in the written response. The procedure is built-in or existing language in the structure, such as an event handler, main method, where the student only implements the body of the procedure rather than defining, naming, returning, and parameters. Like I said before, the event handler, even if there's a loop and a conditional, and I don't know how you get a parameter in an event handler, event handlers are not okay for your explanation for your shining example function. It needs to be your original function. Okay, that is still about the function part, still part 3. Where are we? And the written response describes what the procedure does independently without relating to the overall function of the program. Meaning what is this function doing with regards to your app. In this example, it's just a side function, seconds to minutes. It's a generalized function that several places in my app I needed to take seconds as an integer, like hundreds of seconds, and convert it into minutes : seconds, which is what this function does. It returns a string that whatever. The point of the question is it's not supposed to be the entire app. It is what that function does in the app. Okay, row 5 and 6 are still about the function part of the thing. Your program segment includes your procedure that has sequencing, selection, iteration. Okay, things happen in order. There's a conditional and a loop. You need to show a function that shows those things and explains the detail step, how the identified algorithm works in enough detail for someone to recreate it. Just say what it's doing. We talked about this in the first time through here 10 minutes ago. That's what it's asking for. Does the row 5 point or points is this question? Okay, I think you're starting to see that this rubric isn't, or hopefully you're seeing the rubric isn't 5 or 6 separate things. It's just how this document is broken up into different points. Okay, and that is row 5. And row 6, the last one, is just your part about these two hypothetical calls, two hypothetical scenarios or paths. Describes two calls to the selected procedure, identifying the written response. Each call must pass a different argument. I haven't been using the word argument except occasionally. Argument is a parameter. It is the parameter, but when it's being called. So my function here, seconds to minutes, receives a parameter called seconds, but when it's sent, the part where it sends it is an argument. Okay, when you call the function, these things are arguments, and when you define the function, they get passed to the parameters. We've been using parameters the entire time, which isn't untrue. That language-wise, you could say parameter, this is the parameter because it's gonna become the parameter. But if you see something listed in any sort of question or written response or rubric or something on the AP exam, argument just means the parameters when they're called. Okay, describes two different calls to the selected procedure identified in the written response. Each call must pass different arguments. This is what it means when it says two different calls. I know it here. Two different calls to that function, meaning when it's called, the most likely way is going to be different user inputs to your main parameter, different user inputs that may cause the conditional to take different paths, that sort of thing. Okay, they need to describe the condition being tested, which is this second part, condition being tested, and identify the result of each one. That's these two. Okay, only consider the written response, that last part for this, which is, it's fair as far as getting partial credit for the entire, well, never mind. Don't need to go into that explanation. Okay, responses that do not earn a point for row 4 may still earn a point for this because row 4 is, you could lose the point by having it an event handler because it's not student developed, but you could, in theory, still get the point for row 6, even if you put it in an event handler, which is what this is saying. Okay, requirements. Consider implicit or explicit parameters used in the selected procedure when determining whether the point is earned. Implicit procedures are those that are assigned in anticipation of the call of the procedure. For example, an implicit procedure can be set, implicit parameter can be set through interaction with the GUI, the graphical user interface, meaning that it's a parameter that gets sent because the user typed something. Any sort of user input as your parameter, that's implicit. And in this case, conditions that use the procedures parameter to execute 2 different code segments can earn this point. And does it say what explicit, implicit? I guess explicit is something that is like this, a parameter that's built into the function. The user's never, in my example, the user is never actually choosing the seconds to minutes. It's just being run inside as a side situation, but that's specific to that app. The way they're writing this, it just basically means any sort of parameter. Okay, and the condition that procedures parameter, a condition that uses the procedures parameter to execute 2 different code segments, and it can earn the point, and a condition that uses the procedures parameter to execute or bypass a code segment can earn this point. Meaning, if you have a conditional that returns false or is a Boolean, the orange thing, if something is greater than this and it's false, and that ends the program, that's fine. That is a different run, a different hypothetical call to your Shiny example function. And reasons to not award the point or the full point for our sake. Procedure is not identified. Okay, that's from the previous one. The written response for 3D does not apply to the procedure. If you're talking about something else, it doesn't count. The 2 calls are the exact same sequence of code. And so this is where the 2 calls, we'll worry about this later when we figure out the differences between the different situations. And the response describes conditions being tested that are implausible, inaccurate, or consistent with the program. Again, meaning that it needs to make sense. All right. I don't necessarily expect everyone to grasp or memorize everything that I just said, which is why we are putting up a recording of everything that's going on now. But the 2 documents are here, the written response. Please make a copy. That's what will be submitted. I don't have an assignment up yet for it to submit. And the scoring rubric is that right there. You may have noticed that the possibly last assignment from 3rd quarter is not a 3rd quarter assignment, it is a 4th quarter assignment. And that is the app planning assignment, which is already past due, but it is still able, for you to submit it, which the 4 points assignment is back up here that we did 3 weeks ago. So that's fun. Where are we? 1, 2, 3, 3.5 weeks ago. Okay, so here we are today on Thursday the 7th. Everything for the first parts, the app itself, the PDF, and the video screen capture, which is essentially everything you need to do before you, well, I guess the PDF and screen capture, whatever. These are going to be due on Wednesday, the 17th, and the written response document is due on the 18th. It is just those 3 deliverables. Once this time passes, once we get past this, we will talk about the specifics for submitting to the College Board, which is different. I've been hammering home the fact that everybody is doing this project for your fourth quarter grade. And if you're taking the AP test, you will then submit it to the College Board. Submitting it for the assignment in this class doesn't count as submitting it to the College Board. You still have to do that. Everything with the College Board is between you and them. I am not your intermediary. I'm not your go-between. I'm not your agent. I'm not your whatever other synonyms for that. Everything is between you and them. The point of this project is just to prepare you for that. But like I said, once we are done with this, we will talk about the minute differences for what you actually have to sort of change your format to submit it to College Board. Are there any questions? Timeline questions, deliverable questions, expectations, questions about anything that I just presented? All right, excellent. Ready, 1, 2, 3, go.